Rain fell steadily over the quiet suburban neighborhood, soft and persistent, drumming gently against the windows of Eleanor's cozy home, and as she sipped her tea lost in thought, she heard a knock at the door that made her heart skip a beat, a hesitant, uneven knock that carried a note of urgency, and when she peered through the frosted glass, she saw a young man, soaked from the rain, looking anxious and uncertain, his jacket clinging to him, hair damp across his forehead, and there was a vulnerability in his eyes that immediately stirred something protective, something curious within her, and she opened the door, greeting him with a warm smile, asking if he was all right, and he introduced himself as Adrian, explaining quickly, a little breathlessly, that his car had broken down nearby and he had nowhere else to turn, that a friend had suggested she might help, and Eleanor, feeling a mixture of surprise and an unexplainable pull toward this stranger, invited him inside, offering a towel and a warm cup of tea, noticing the way he relaxed slightly at her hospitality, the way his tense shoulders lowered, and as he sat across from her in the soft glow of the living room light, Eleanor found herself studying him, observing the nervous energy in his posture, the subtle flicker of a smile when she handed him the tea, and the quiet intensity in his gaze, a depth that hinted at past struggles, unspoken thoughts, and perhaps hidden longing, and she felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest, a mix of curiosity, empathy, and something that could almost be called attraction, yet tempered with caution, as she had learned over the years that life often brought fleeting encounters, moments of connection that burned bright and then vanished, and she wondered if this meeting was destined to be another brief encounter or something more, something that might linger in her memory long after the rain stopped. As they settled into conversation, Adrian spoke in a voice that was polite but carried hints of fatigue and worry, telling her about the car trouble, the unexpected obstacles of the day, and the minor misfortunes that had led him to her doorstep, and Eleanor listened, offering small words of comfort, advice, and understanding, finding herself drawn to the cadence of his voice, the careful choice of words, the subtle vulnerability he revealed despite his attempts to maintain composure, and as they spoke, the storm outside seemed to fade in significance, the world shrinking until it was just the two of them, connected in a quiet, unexpected intimacy, a space where worries and small talk intertwined with something deeper, something unspoken yet palpably present, a thread that pulled at Eleanor's heart and imagination alike, making her feel alive in a way she had not felt in years, a warmth spreading through her chest as they exchanged glances, tentative smiles, and fleeting touches, and she realized that the ordinary evening intended for solitude and reflection had transformed into something extraordinary, an encounter charged with potential, possibility, and the quiet thrill of connection, the kind that is both subtle and profound, fleeting yet unforgettable. As the minutes stretched, Eleanor found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, sharing small stories of her own life, anecdotes tinged with humor, regret, and reflection, and Adrian listened with genuine interest, leaning slightly forward, nodding, responding with empathy and understanding, making Eleanor feel seen and appreciated in a way that warmed her soul, and she noticed the little things, the way he laughed softly, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way his hands moved naturally as he gestured while speaking, all of which made her heart race with quiet excitement, a gentle, persistent beat that resonated deep within her, reminding her that connection was possible, even in the most unexpected circumstances, and she wondered if he, too, felt this strange, delicate attraction, this silent recognition of shared humanity and hidden longing, the sense that two lives could briefly intersect in a meaningful way, leaving an imprint that lingered long after the encounter ended. The conversation meandered naturally, flowing from practical concerns about the car, to lighter stories about childhood memories, and then to dreams, fears, and reflections on life, each topic revealing more layers of Adrian's character and Eleanor's own emotions, creating a tapestry of understanding, empathy, and subtle admiration, and Eleanor felt an increasing desire to prolong the visit, to explore these newfound feelings, yet there was a gentle restraint, a cautious awareness that emotions like these needed time to breathe, space to grow, and respect to develop naturally, and she found herself smiling more freely, laughing more genuinely, and feeling a sense of exhilaration at the unexpected intimacy building quietly between them, small gestures, shared glances, and fleeting touches carrying more meaning than words could express. The storm outside grew heavier for a time, rain thrumming against the roof, lightning occasionally illuminating the room in brief, silver flashes, and with the sound of thunder in the distance, Eleanor noticed how Adrian seemed to shrink slightly at each rumble, a boyish vulnerability that made her heart ache with tenderness, and she instinctively reached for a blanket to offer him, draping it gently over his shoulders, their hands brushing in the process, a touch electric enough to make her pulse quicken and leave a warmth lingering long after. And in that moment Eleanor understood that this visit, this unexpected knock on her door, had become more than an ordinary act of kindness. It was the start of a connection that carried emotional weight, subtle attraction, and the promise of shared vulnerability, a delicate beginning of something that could grow into a profound bond if nurtured with patience, care, and mutual respect. They spent hours together, talking, laughing, sharing silence, and Eleanor noticed how comfortable it felt to be in his presence, the way his voice filled the room without demanding attention, the quiet confidence tempered by humility and warmth, and how naturally their conversation flowed, as if they had known each other far longer than the brief hours since the storm had brought him to her door. And she was struck by the oddity and beauty of this instant connection, the way strangers could become so intimately entwined emotionally in such a short span, the way trust and attraction could bloom quietly, subtly, in small gestures, shared stories, and the simple act of listening with intent. And as night deepened and the rain continued to fall, they realized the hours had slipped by unnoticed, the storm outside acting as a cocoon, enclosing them in their own world, and Eleanor felt a mixture of exhilaration and longing, her heart lifted by the rare joy of being seen, understood, and quietly admired by someone who had entered her life unexpectedly, a visitor in the rain who had stirred something within her that she hadn't known was still alive, a sense of possibility, anticipation, and gentle hope that this encounter might be the start of something extraordinary, something delicate yet enduring. And just as she reached for her cup to take another sip, there came a sudden, unexpected knock at the door, more insistent this time, jolting them both from their quiet reverie, and Eleanor's heart leapt with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, wondering who it could be, whether it was someone from Adrian's life, the mechanic, or a passerby. And as she moved toward the door, her mind raced with possibilities, her chest tight with anticipation, and when she opened it, she realized that this simple, rainy evening had set the stage for events that neither of them could yet fully understand, that life had conspired to bring them together, and that the choices they made in the coming moments could alter the course of both their lives, leaving Eleanor with a fluttering hope, an undeniable connection, and the first thrilling sense that something meaningful, delicate, and unforgettable was quietly beginning, a story that would unfold slowly yet passionately, one gentle interaction, shared smile, and fleeting touch at a time, leaving both Eleanor and Adrian suspended between longing, curiosity, and the delicate thrill of something new, tender, and full of possibility. As the rain continued to fall, soft, persistent, and insistently present, outside and within the quiet corners of their hearts, the morning after the rainstorm, Eleanor awoke with a restless heart, replaying the previous evening in her mind, the brief but intense connection she had felt with Adrian lingering in every thought. And before she could finish her tea, there was a soft knock at the door that made her pulse quicken, and when she opened it, there he stood, slightly damp from the lingering drizzle, apologetic yet hopeful, his gaze meeting hers with a warmth that stirred something deep inside her, and without thinking, she invited him in, the air between them charged with a delicate tension that was impossible to ignore. And as he entered, shaking off the wetness from his jacket, Eleanor felt an unexpected thrill, noticing the small details she hadn't seen before. The curve of his smile, the depth in his eyes, the nervous way he ran a hand through his hair. And she realized that this was more than just courtesy or chance, that something was quietly blossoming between them, something tender, fragile, and intensely alive. And as they sat with cups of steaming tea, they began to talk, tentatively at first, about mundane things like the stubborn car, his day, the weather. Yet gradually the conversation deepened, peeling back layers of their lives, and Adrian shared memories of past failures, disappointments, and dreams that had been delayed, his voice soft yet filled with emotion, and Eleanor listened, her heart opening in unexpected ways, feeling empathy, admiration, and a longing she had thought she had buried long ago. And as the rain pattered gently against the windows, a strange comfort settled over them, the world outside fading until it was just the two of them, speaking quietly, sharing glances, laughter, and small gestures that seemed to carry unspoken meanings, their hands brushing occasionally in passing, sending tiny shocks of awareness through both of them. And Eleanor noticed how his presence made even the simplest things feel significant, how his laughter echoed in her chest, How his soft voice lingered in her mind long after he spoke, and Adrian too seemed affected, his usual calm demeanor giving way to subtle signs of nervousness, a flicker of shyness in his eyes, a hesitation in his movements, revealing a vulnerability that only drew her closer, making her want to reach out, to offer reassurance, to be part of the life that now seemed to be weaving itself quietly around them. Over the next few days, Adrian's visits became more frequent, always under practical pretexts like needing guidance on fixing the car, checking on parts, or running small errands. Yet Eleanor could sense that these reasons were secondary to the real connection forming between them, the desire for companionship, for understanding, for someone who could see beyond the surface and recognize the quiet longing they both carried. And as they spent more time together, Eleanor found herself observing him in ways that were entirely new, noting the thoughtful pause in his expressions, the small smiles that flickered when he was pleased, the subtle ways he leaned closer when engaged in conversation, and the warmth in his eyes that betrayed feelings neither had yet admitted. And Adrian, in turn, seemed drawn to her with a mix of curiosity and admiration, often lingering near her when leaving, stealing glances that spoke louder than words, moments heavy with silent questions and unspoken possibilities. And one afternoon, when he returned with a stubborn part that refused to fit, Eleanor offered her garage to help, and together they worked side by side, crouched over the engine, hands occasionally brushing as they passed tools, laughter spilling freely as they joked about their clumsy attempts, and every touch, every shared glance, every small smile seemed to heighten the electricity between them, a delicate tension that neither dared to name but both felt acutely, making even the work on the car feel charged with intimacy. And as they paused to catch their breath, Eleanor caught herself studying the curve of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the softness in his voice when he spoke her name. And Adrian noticed her attention, smiling shyly, a flicker of awareness passing between them, a silent acknowledgement that the ordinary tasks had become extraordinary through their shared presence. And after hours of labor, wiping their hands on rags and laughing at the stubbornness of the machinery, they finally stepped back, breathing heavily, the accomplishment tangible but the unspoken connection even more so, the garage silent except for the sound of their soft, uneven breaths and the faint hum of the evening settling outside. And Eleanor felt a warmth in her chest she had not realized she had been missing, a fragile happiness that seemed to grow with every moment spent together, a quiet hope that perhaps this connection could develop into something lasting, tender, and meaningful. And just as the thought crossed her mind, Adrian reached out, his hand brushing against hers, hesitation and desire mingling in that brief contact, sending a thrill through her body. And for a long moment they froze, hearts beating in quiet anticipation. Yet before words could be spoken, the sudden chime of his phone broke the spell, and he excused himself, stepping outside to answer, leaving Eleanor alone in the garage with her thoughts racing. And the voice on the other end brought news that complicated matters, responsibilities and obligations that threatened to intrude on the fragile bond they were forming. And Eleanor felt a pang of disappointment mixed with understanding, knowing that life rarely allowed for perfect timing, yet also realizing that the intensity of their emotions was undeniable, the pull between them strong, alive, and impossible to ignore. And when Adrian returned, his expression was guarded but his eyes betrayed the turmoil he felt, a mixture of longing, regret, and hope. And he apologized for the interruption, explaining that the call had reminded him of duties he could not ignore. Yet despite this, he remained, lingering near her side, a silent plea in his gaze that asked for understanding, for patience, for the chance to explore the connection that had quietly blossomed between them. And Eleanor, touched by his honesty, reached out, her hand brushing his in reassurance, a simple gesture that spoke volumes about the trust, the care, and the mutual attraction growing between them. And for a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath as they shared a quiet awareness, the space between them heavy with possibility, the kind of intimate tension that is felt rather than spoken, delicate and intoxicating. And as the evening darkened, they continued their work in comfortable silence, sharing small smiles and glances, each aware of the fragile bond developing, a bond built on vulnerability, empathy, and the slow unfolding of feelings that neither had expected but both welcomed. And as the night deepened, Eleanor watched him prepare to leave, feeling her heart tighten with the longing of someone who has glimpsed happiness but knows it is only partially theirs. And Adrian lingered, as if reluctant to break the fragile spell, and in that lingering moment, a silent promise passed between them, a recognition that this connection mattered, that it had the potential to grow into something lasting, that the spark between them, once ignited, could not easily be extinguished, leaving both of them suspended between hope and uncertainty, desire and caution, knowing that whatever came next, their lives had already been changed in subtle but undeniable ways, and that the path ahead, though complicated and uncertain, held the promise of intimacy, understanding, and perhaps even the tender beginnings of love, a love born slowly, quietly, in stolen moments, shared laughter, brushed hands, and conversations that revealed the hearts beneath the masks, leaving them both eager, anxious, and deeply aware of the fragile beauty of the connection that had begun to bloom between them. The following morning, Eleanor awoke with a fluttering in her chest, thinking about Adrian and the quiet connection that had grown between them over the past few days, and as she moved through her morning routine, she found herself hoping, almost nervously, that he might come again, that their shared moments of laughter, conversation, and subtle touches were not fleeting but the beginning of something deeper, something meaningful. And just as she poured her tea, a familiar knock at the door made her heart skip a beat, and there he was, smiling slightly, damp hair clinging to his forehead from the light drizzle outside, his eyes carrying a mixture of apology, warmth, and that quiet intensity that had drawn her in from the very first meeting, and she welcomed him inside with a gentle invitation, feeling the excitement and tension coil in her chest, a feeling she hadn't realized she could experience again, a mix of anticipation, longing, and curiosity that made every small gesture between them feel significant. And as they sat together with mugs of steaming tea, the silence between them was comfortable, not awkward, filled with the unspoken understanding that both of them were feeling something that went beyond friendship, beyond simple companionship, a connection rooted in shared vulnerability and unspoken desire. And soon their conversation drifted naturally to deeper subjects, Adrian sharing memories of his past that were tinged with regret and hope, speaking of dreams he had abandoned, loves he had lost, and moments when he felt truly alive. And Eleanor listened with empathy, sharing small fragments of her own history, the quiet heartbreaks, the moments of joy that had surprised her, the regrets that lingered like shadows, and as they exchanged stories, laughter, and occasional thoughtful silences, the bond between them strengthened, a delicate tapestry of emotions being woven thread by thread, subtle glances, fleeting touches, and shared smiles creating an intimacy neither of them had anticipated, yet both welcomed with a mixture of eagerness and caution, aware that life was unpredictable, that connections like this were rare, and that the fragility of their circumstances only heightened the value of these moments. And as the afternoon light faded into soft evening hues, Adrian suggested they take a short walk outside to enjoy the cool air, and Eleanor, feeling a thrill at the idea, agreed, sensing that every step together was a step into a new chapter neither had expected but both were ready to explore. And as they walked along the quiet suburban streets, the rain from the previous nights having left a fresh, earthy scent in the air, their conversation flowed effortlessly, laughter mingling with comfortable silence, the occasional brush of hands sending sparks of awareness through both of them, and Eleanor noticed how natural it felt to be beside him, how easy it was to share thoughts, fears, and dreams, how his presence seemed to illuminate the ordinary world around her, making trees, streetlights, and the soft hum of evening life feel more vivid and alive. And Adrian, too, seemed affected, his gaze lingering on her face in a way that was both tender and searching, revealing the depth of emotion he carried, a mix of admiration, attraction, and the subtle hope for something more. And they paused by a small park, the grass glistening with moisture, and for a moment they simply stood together, the air charged with anticipation, their hearts beating in quiet synchronization, neither speaking, both aware of the delicate tension between them, the unspoken promise that something beautiful was unfolding. And as the wind rustled softly through the trees, Eleanor felt the warmth of his hand brush against hers, a fleeting contact that left her breathless, a tiny spark of intimacy that spoke volumes. And Adrian turned to her, his voice low and hesitant, admitting that he couldn't stop thinking about her, about these stolen moments, about the connection that had grown so quickly yet felt timeless. And Eleanor, feeling her own heart respond, smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the unspoken emotions, the longing, and the fragile hope that perhaps this was the beginning of something neither had dared to dream so soon. And just as they leaned slightly closer, a distant sound, a dog barking, the crunch of tires on gravel, pulled their attention outward, reminding them of the world beyond their small, intimate bubble, and they laughed lightly at the interruption, a shared sound that brought them back to the present, yet the electric moment lingered, heavy with possibilities, making the minutes stretch and shimmer with unspoken desire, awareness, and emotional intensity. And as they walked back to Eleanor's home, the air felt charged, every glance, every subtle smile, every brush of hands carrying a weight that neither could ignore. A tension built not on passion alone but on the emotional intimacy that had developed, a longing tempered by understanding, empathy, and the cautious thrill of potential love. And once inside, they returned to the garage to check the car one last time, their movements natural, unhurried, filled with shared laughter and quiet glances. And Eleanor noticed how easy it felt to be near him, how effortlessly the mundane tasks became extraordinary when performed together, how the simplest gestures carried meaning and warmth. And Adrian, for his part, seemed equally aware, his voice soft, his expressions thoughtful, his eyes never straying far from hers, their connection deepening with every passing moment. And as they finished the work, they paused, standing side by side, breathing in the still air, the faint scent of oil and metal mixing with the earthy remnants of the rain outside. And in that quiet pause, time seemed to stretch, allowing them to savor the closeness, the fragile intimacy, the emotions that had grown between them so quickly yet felt profound and lasting. And Adrian finally spoke, his words hesitant yet earnest, admitting that he didn't know what the future held, that life was unpredictable, yet he could not deny the depth of feeling he had discovered, the attraction, the companionship, the rare comfort of being truly understood and seen. And Eleanor, her heart swelling with a mix of joy, hope, and vulnerability, placed her hand lightly on his arm, a gesture of reassurance, connection, and silent agreement. And for a long moment, they simply stood together, the world outside fading, the mundane fading, leaving only the two of them suspended in a fragile bubble of awareness, emotion, and possibility. And as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Adrian reluctantly moved toward the door, pausing to look back, their eyes meeting, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a promise to explore this connection, to nurture it, and to see where it might lead. And Eleanor watched him leave, her chest tight with longing, her mind swirling with thoughts of what had begun, knowing that the bond they had formed was precious, rare, and worth protecting, a slow-burning flame of trust, attraction, and emotional intimacy that had the power to grow into a deep, lasting love if nurtured carefully. And as she closed the door behind him, she felt the echo of his presence lingering, the warmth of his touch, the intensity of his gaze, the quiet certainty that life had shifted subtly, irreversibly, and beautifully, leaving her heart open, her spirit hopeful, and her soul quietly anticipating the next encounter, knowing that the story of Adrian and Eleanor was only beginning, and that every shared glance, every laugh, every small touch and tender moment would continue to weave a tapestry of connection, longing, and quiet romance, carrying them forward into a future filled with possibility, hope, and the delicate, enduring magic of two hearts recognizing each other and daring to explore what lay ahead.